If you're a Star Fox fan, or a Rare fan, or even just a Nintendo fan, you've likely caught wind of some pretty big developments over the past week or two. On February 20th, 2021, video game preservationist group Forest of Illusion released a very late build of Dinosaur Planet, dated to December 1st of 2000. This would have been just under a year after Nintendo entered into talks with Rare to turn Dinosaur Planet into Star Fox Adventures. I've had a few people ask if I'd talk about this build, but I wanted to give it some time to try and get a good sense of what we actually have. If you're part of this community, and especially if you're involved in the Dinosaur Planet Finders Club Discord server, you know that ever since this ROM was released, there's been a constant flow of new discoveries. With that in mind, this will by no means be the definitive video on Dinosaur Planet, but rather a look at where the game is now and what we've already learned from this build. I'm John Rairdin, you're watching NWR TV. Join me as we dive into what was once thought the lost, extinct history of Star Fox Adventures as we explore Dinosaur Planet for the Nintendo 64. Some quick context for those not familiar with the history. Around 1998 or 1999, Rare began development on a prehistoric-themed adventure game that took heavy influence from The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. It was to be an expansive story taking place across a giant, unified world. The player would swap between two different characters, each with their own story, Crystal and Saber. In early 2000, a demo was put together to show the game publicly at that year's E3, but instead, Rare wound up showing it to a very interested Nintendo, who were extremely impressed with the game. They pitched to Rare the idea of combining Dinosaur Planet with the Star Fox IP. According to Dinosaur Planet's art lead Kev Bayless, they were very excited to be given access to the IP, and development began on what would ultimately become Star Fox Adventures. For a long time, it was assumed that this was the moment when the game made the jump from the Nintendo 64 to the Nintendo GameCube, where it would ultimately release in 2002. But that is where this new build comes in and shakes things up. The December 1st, 2000 build of Dinosaur Planet is not only the most complete look we've ever had at the original game, but it also includes Fox McCloud as a playable character, seemingly indicating that Fox's inclusion was at least not entirely responsible for the shift to GameCube. So what else can we learn from this build of Dinosaur Planet? Well, we'll need to approach this from two angles. First, we'll simply boot it up and see what we can see. After that, we'll turn to the team of dedicated fans who are piecing together this puzzle on a deeper level. I've loaded the build onto an EverDrive, which will allow us to play it on actual hardware. Currently, there are a lot of visual bugs playing in emulators, so this is the most accurate picture we can get for our first look at the game. First impressions are actually very good, as we have an hour or so of what seems fairly complete. We start as Crystal, in a scene that mirrors very closely what can be found in Star Fox Adventures. She approaches the galleon of General Scales to rescue Kite, the princess of the Cloudrunner tribe. She attacks the galleon in a rail shooter style, and it's worth noting that this segment was not added to fit the Star Fox title. The rail shooting engine was at least somewhat already implemented prior to the acquisition of the Star Fox license. Upon landing on the galleon, we are confronted by General Scales, but instead of him throwing Crystal from the ship, Scales is struck by lightning and teleports away for, reasons. Crystal then takes the galleon to Warlock Mountain, which seems to serve the same purpose as the Krazoa Temple in Star Fox Adventures. Here she meets with Randorn, her adoptive father, and father of Saber before he was replaced by Fox. Randorn explains to her what's going on, and plays the same role as the Earthwalker soldier in Star Fox Adventures. Crystal learns the Staff Blast, and returns to the galleon only to find Scales has returned. He takes the galleon and Princess Kite, leaving Crystal stranded, but she finds a teleporter and leaves the mountain. She encounters the Swap Stone, who would eventually be replaced by the Warp Stone in Star Fox Adventures. The Swap Stone allows the player to swap to Fox's story on the other side of the planet. When we find Fox, he's already on the hunt for Prince Tricky, and what plays out is largely identical to this scene in Star Fox Adventures. Tricky is delivered via ship and taken behind a door. Fox shoots a switch above the door to open it, where Prince Tricky's captors flee on speeder bikes. Fox pursues them and ultimately winds up crashing into a pool of water before reuniting with Tricky. It is worth noting that Fox's dialogue in this segment makes it very clear that they are just swapping in Fox's name and the Lilat system for where he's from into Saber's existing dialogue.
I am Fox McCloud, Royal Knight of the Lilat system. I I've come to take the prince back to his home. Hey, wait!
I am Fox McCloud, lead pilot of the Star Fox team. I've come to take the prince back to his home.
There are some slightly more aggressive dialogue changes later, but it's very clear that this is early in the conversion to a Star Fox game. Tricky and Fox make their way across the Snowhorn Wastes, which once again are very similar to their appearance in Star Fox Adventures and feature some of the same puzzles. Fox and Tricky eventually make it back to the Swapstone Hollow, where it's snowing for some reason. I don't think it's supposed to be snowing. It wasn't snowing when I emulated this part, but whatever, let's roll with it. The Queen Earthwalker is sick, and they have to gather 10 white mushrooms to heal her. Once they do, Fox tries to leave, but the Queen Earthwalker pleads with him to stay to save Randorn. Now, Randorn would have been Saber's father, but his relationship to Fox isn't really made clear, but Fox apparently cares because it's enough for him to stick around. Fox agrees, and at this point, we can return to the Swapstone and switch back to Crystal. As for the near-finished segments of the game, that's it. Beyond this, Crystal is dropped into a huge environment with no direction and broken events ultimately blocking most progression, but we can see a few recognizable areas. First is Cape Claw, which features different music, which is still great. Cape Claw has the best music regardless of what version of this game you play. It also has a very similar layout to its appearance in Star Fox Adventures. Crystal can free a dinosaur here who gives her a shield spell. She can also knock this log down and use it to sail around the water. Also, she makes this face when she knocks it down, and it haunts my soul. In this build, when you get on the log, it just sort of absorbs Crystal and her head just sort of pokes out, and it's a little strange and you can't get back off, but you know, whatever, it works. There is a crack in the wall over here, but every time I try to enter it, the game crashes. You see, one of the issues we're finding digging through Dinosaur Planet is that the pure, unfiltered ambition of this game is often enough to crash it. Just like Star Fox Adventures, Dinosaur Planet was intended to be a huge, continuous world. That means no fading to black or loading between different areas. It just keeps going. It's impressive on the GameCube and downright unbelievable on the Nintendo 64. So when exploring this build, it's important to take your time, as moving through the world too quickly can often overwhelm the poor Nintendo 64 and cause the game to crash. Next we have what is in Star Fox Adventures, Lightfoot Village. There isn't a whole lot to do here, though it's clear that this awful button-mashing minigame would have been present in Dinosaur Planet as well. Thank God. Finally, there's this entirely new desert area with a temple, and after you fight a bunch of these tumbleweeds that fall from the trees, Crystal can open this door using an item she definitely never picked up. But you know what? Just roll with it, the door is opening, don't complain. Beyond this door is more desert, including a dinosaur who refills your magic, and an area that is blocked off by quicksand. So this is how far we can make it in this build using the ROM as it is. There is a path leading off from Swapstone Hollow that you can theoretically make it down with constant pause buffering, but I can't seem to nail the timing. Pause buffering is essentially pausing the game constantly during moments where you know it's loading a lot very quickly, so that you can keep moving forward, but give the game more time to load before it becomes overwhelmed. But what if we throw in some good old-fashioned cheat codes and start forcing our way through some barriers, reintroducing items, and just pushing through? Well, that's where things get interesting. A lot of the footage I'm going to be showing was gathered by the awesome community of Dinosaur Planet and Star Fox Adventures fans that have come together since the release of this build. I'll of course be crediting each piece of footage to its original source, so make sure to check them out as they continue to explore the game. Years ago, a condensed script for Dinosaur Planet was released online, which is now giving us the tools to try and get Dinosaur Planet back in order. By using cheats and modifying the game in various ways, we've uncovered much more than is accessible directly. Areas both old and new are being explored. The mines of Dragon Rock, previously home to Dracor, now appear much more elaborate, with a new boss fight and an escape sequence of some sort. As for Dracor, he appears to be one of the final bosses of the game, outlasting General Scales by a significant margin. In fact, contrary to popular belief, no, Scales wasn't robbed of his big bad status by Andross. He was never the big bad in the first place. In fact, he lasted longer in Star Fox Adventures than it appears he was supposed to in Dinosaur Planet. There are other areas that seem remarkably similar to how they play out in Star Fox Adventures. This fight against Galdon, for example, seems pretty identical, but there are also entire environments that we've never seen before. Arguably the most incredible thing we've seen so far, though, is just this image of the entire map that really just hammers home what a huge and relatively open-world game Dinosaur Planet was attempting to present on the Nintendo 64. Asset streaming on this scale just wasn't done on that system. In fact, it really wouldn't become commonplace until the end of the GameCube's generation and really more into the Xbox 360 PS3 era. Now granted, it's not working great on the Nintendo 64, and honestly some of these struggles may have contributed to why it moved to GameCube. The fact that they were attempting it at all is impressive, and from the hour or so of more completed gameplay we can see in this build, it seems like once things were optimized, it worked reasonably well. It's also worth noting that for a long time the prevailing story of Dinosaur Planet was that Star Fox Adventures was essentially half of what Dinosaur Planet was intended to be. That they had essentially taken Saber's half of Dinosaur Planet and turned that into a game, while cutting out Crystal's half entirely. This doesn't appear to be the case. While yes, there are segments of Dinosaur Planet and of course plot points that were cut from the final game, it's by no means as straightforward as cutting out Crystal's half of the game entirely. Fox clearly visits areas that were originally intended for Crystal, and there are elements of Star Fox Adventures that don't appear to be present in Dinosaur Planet. It will be fascinating to watch as fans continue to meticulously pore over Dinosaur Planet, trying to piece together the game that never was, trying desperately to see if there's any hope of restoring it to a fully playable state. Essentially, Dinosaur Planet and Star Fox Adventures fans are looking at a very similar situation to what was faced by Star Fox 2 fans when that build hit the scene. The difference here is that the scale of Dinosaur Planet far exceeds that comparatively simple game. It's unclear just how close to completion this build is, but no doubt significant elements remain entirely unimplemented. Only time will tell whether this dedicated community can muster up a full game. Regardless, Dinosaur Planet represents a fascinating look at the history of Rare, Star Fox, and the Nintendo 64, and you can rest assured that we'll probably be revisiting this game again in the future. This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Did you know that Nintendo World Report is funded directly by fans like you? When you support Nintendo World Report on Patreon, you get immediate access to multiple exclusive podcasts every month, exclusive Discord channels, an early look at select content, and more, all for as little as $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.